She walks like someone who has already lived 2 lifetimes by midnight. Qinghuan's shoes are scuffed at the heels. The soles clap a tired rhythm on the uneven pavement as the city blurs into a string of sodium lights. In her tote bag, a uniform stained with grease, a paper-wrapped sandwich half-eaten between the hospital appointment card and an envelope with her mother's name stamped on it. On her phone, the call log is a ledger of small panics. Pre-op reminder, please confirm insurance, call us back. She has been answering those calls between jobs for a month, hanging up politely and moving on to the next shift. Cashier, cleaner, delivery rider, temp at the clinic, night shift receptionist, 10 jobs. Sometimes she counts them not to impress anyone, but to remind herself she is still moving. Tonight the work feels heavier than the bag on her shoulder. She finishes the cleaning in a corporate wing past midnight, scrubbing coffee stains that never fade and wiping fingerprints from glass doors that somehow reappear in the morning. The fluorescent lights hum like a warning. Her spine aches, her eyes burn. When the security guard at the desk tells her the last elevator has been turned off, she smiles and says she'll take the stairs, because it's easier to swallow pride than to ask for help. Outside, the rain is a fine mist that makes the city smell of wet cement and diesel. She keeps walking. The hospital appointment is in the morning. The consultation will cost more than she has in her wallet. Her mother's voice on the last call sounded smaller than usual. Qinghuan, don't take more shifts. Your father? But there's no father to catch them, and she needs to choose. Buy the antibiotics and a few days of respite for her mother, or cover a portion of the pre-op expenses. She chooses the third option that always exists in her head. Work until there is no other choice. She doesn't notice the polished black doors at first. They belong to the CEO's wing, a private circle above the city where the affluent close their meetings with handshakes and private trust funds. She does not belong to such doors. Still, exhaustion makes the world slippery. The security stairwell leads her in the wrong direction. A service entrance she assumes will be locked opens a fraction under her shoulder. The corridor beyond is carpeted, warm, perfumed with the residual scent of citrus and leather. Somewhere far above, the hum of the city becomes a distant ocean. There is a couch, velvet and deep, placed in a small lounge outside a suite. Its blue is the color of thrift store dresses she used to buy on paydays. She collapses onto it because the world is suddenly a hand in her chest that won't unclench. Her head hits the cushion. Her body unthreads itself. A uniformed vest, a name tag left on the coffee table, detail notes from someone else's life. Temple beads of exhaustion cradle her eyelids. She will sleep for 20 minutes, she thinks drowsily, and then she will wake and move on. She doesn't wake for 20 minutes. When the door opens, it is with that soft but decisive motion the universe uses to remind certain lives that other people exist. A ring of keys falls onto the marble table with a muted clink. A man steps into the small light of the suite and pauses, as if an actor entering his stage found a stranger in the wings. Fu Yanqi stands framed by the doorway like a photograph. He is tall in that quiet way that doesn't need a crease in the suit to speak authority. The city's glass lights reflect in his eyes, and for a breath, the suite is only a stage with a sleeping woman on the couch, an accidental tableau. Xu's hair has fallen over one cheek, her lashes shadow her face. A sliver of a bruise like a memory under her eye is visible where the night lamp touches skin. Fu's hand lifts to still the noise of his surprise. 10 years have a strange way of reassembling themselves in a second. He knows this face from a classroom that smelled of chalk, from a bench where 2 teenagers shared strawberries and whispered promises that never needed proof. He remembers the small kindness of a girl who had once lent him a pencil, and later, in a frailer memory, a coat when a sudden storm soaked the schoolyard. Life went along 2 divergent tracks, one that led him to ascending boardrooms and executive suites, the other that hung onto the edges of the city and learned how to make every coin count. He has kept the memory of a girl who sketched piano keys in margins, who hummed to herself when she mopped. He could have carried it like a secret relic, or he could let it bruise under the weight of the world. He chooses neither yet. He stands, the silence between them a thin sheet of ice. He could call security. He could wake her and ask her to leave. He could decide that this was an intruder and treat her as such. Instead, he watches the even rise and fall of her chest and finds his own breath slowing. Exhaustion on people's faces looks like an apology to the world. When she opens her eyes, bright and panicked and small, she sees him first as the consequence of having made a choice she now doubts. "I'm sorry," She starts, voice still sandpapery from sleep. You must be cold, he says instead, and it is an observation rendered like an offer. He moves without hurry, retrieves his blazer from a chair and lays it over her shoulders. The fabric is warm. It smells faintly of cedar and his cologne, an elegant contradiction to the sense of the night she carries. For the first time in years, something tender and decisive settles between them. Ju's fingers close on the lapel as if holding onto a lifeline. He learns her name from the security guard's calls later as they stand in the suite's small kitchen, a late-night sanctuary suddenly populated by the odd intimacy of two strangers. He learns her story in disclaimers threaded between coughs. Hospital, mother, surgery, debt, 10 jobs a week, a daughter carrying more than a purse. She tries reflexively to downplay it. She knows the language of shame. But the way she lists the numbers, the how and the why, the precise small humiliations, no one rehearses that. He listens. There is a balance in his posture between disbelief and a rising stubborn want to do something about the shape of her life. Fu Yanxi has dealt in board approvals and quarterly forecasts his whole adult life. He has never been asked to sign something as immense as another person's future without the iron anchor of a contract. So he proposes a contract of a different sort. I can cover your mother's surgery, he says plainly. The hospital fees, the pre-op and follow-ups. I can arrange it with the hospital and handle the payments. Her laugh is a bad thing, half a sob, half a protest. Why would you? Because you saved my mother once, he says before he can stop himself, and the confessional slips out like a key. He sees her reaction, a blink into memory, a tightening of the hands. But Shu does not remember saving anyone's mother. She remembers a cold bench, spilled strawberries, a younger boy with ink on his shirt. But not a rescue. She has always been careful with memories. They are small and frayed at the edges, like her father's sweater. To her, being offered help by an executive is either an error or an advertisement. Generosity from that world comes with strings. There is a string in his offer, and he does not try to hide it. In exchange, we make something official. Legal protection for you and your mother. A marriage of convenience, purely legal. You keep your name. You're not asked to play a role. You get the operation, and you get a residence where your mother can recover with privacy and care. She pulls the blanket tighter, measuring the proposal like one measures a weight in a hand. She thinks of hospital rooms with rattle bead drapes, of disinfectant scent and bright fluorescent panels. She imagines her mother's hand, so thin now, reaching for a spoon she can't hold steady. 10 jobs mean pockets full of lint and not enough to buy reassurance. This is the kind of leverage poverty negotiates with dignity. You want me to marry you? Her voice is incredulous and practical. This is not a fairy tale query, but a ledger balancing itself out. For money. He meets her eyes and tells the truth. Not for money. For the legal protections that money alone can't give you in this city. For immediate access to resources. For a place where your mother can recover without worrying about rent. For a chance to pay back what you owe without being hounded. She is no stranger to the language of deals. It keeps her small and safe. She asks practical questions, the ones that stabilize panic. What does legal mean exactly? Are there hearings? Will people know? How long? Are there conditions? Required appearances? Will your family approve? None of them are romantic. They are survival. He answers them one by one. The duration is negotiable. The legal team will draw concise terms, separate finances, limited joint property, medical power of attorney only for her mother's care. He wants nothing from her personally. There is a caveat as simple and complex as breathing. I will not force you into public roles you don't want. I will not ask for affection. Yet his fingers fail to disguise the tremor that runs through the statement. He has spent 10 years building steel walls around a tender core. Offering this protection is the first time he has left any of those walls open. Because of the nature of the offer, it requires immediacy. The surgery is scheduled in 2 weeks. The hospital needs deposits, and sometimes the obsession of wealth is its capacity to move a system with a single signature. Shu calculates in her head as if the numbers are another shift. The deposit, the follow-up care, the transportation. She pictures her mother lying on a bed that does not smell like bleach and worry, specialists who will call with names she does not know. She pictures sleep that is not punctuated by alarm clocks or fear. Agreement becomes a contract on paper signed the next morning in the CEO's private office. The scene is surreal. The signature is both a legal seal and a surrender of a certain kind of autonomy. He insists on a clause more for himself than for legal tech. They keep the arrangement private, limited to necessary staff. He asks for no affection, and she asks for dignity to be left intact. Both promises are loose as paper boats in the weather to come. After the documents are signed, the suite feels both like a refuge and a border crossing. Zhu leaves with a phone number and a driver's card tucked into her palm, feeling both absurdly relieved and exposed. The legal team transfers funds into the hospital account within hours, and the hospital, which moves very quickly for those with means, schedules the operation for her mother's pre-op in a matter of days. At home, Zhu calls her mother, and for the first time in months, can breathe a different kind of word. We have a plan. We can do this. Word travels faster than people think in high places, and the city is a lattice of gossip lines that prefer the juicy to the true. The signature that promised privacy becomes, in the space between a single receptionist and an idle PA, the kind of whisper that can set an entire company's rumor mill turning. Fu Yanxi's office sends directives in measured emails. The legal team files everything away in secure servers. But on the street, in clinics, in small restaurants where Xu eats the leftover sandwiches folded like last-minute prayers, people look at her differently. Some glance with curiosity, others with an odd mixture of pity and accusation. She shrugs it off the way she has shrugged off worse, with tight shoulders and a focus on the next task. When she moves into the guest apartment the company provides, it feels like an appendix added to someone else's story. The building is quiet, in a way the neighborhoods where she lived never are. The kitchen is stocked with herbs that seem smug in their freshness. The bed is wide and unfamiliar. There is a piano in the parlor, an instrument she long ago promised herself she would learn properly when life gave her margin for such luxuries. She places her hand on the keys and the sound that comes out is tentative, like someone testing a new map. Fu's kindnesses arrive in small packages. A nanny is arranged for a week to help with appointments. A room attendant with soft hands neatly folds her work shirts and leaves a vase of strawberries on the countertop. Two small red things that seem familiar as coincidence. In the ambiguous quiet of a gilded residence, strawberries return like a motif. No longer just a flavor from a schoolyard, but a symbol that two lives once crossed and left an imprint. Not everyone receives this arrangement with equanimity. The most immediate ripple comes from within the company itself. Xia Wanyu is young, polished, and wrapped in entitlement like a second skin. She is the heiress with a future chalked out in chairmanship meetings and photo ops. She has watched the CEO's life orbit with a protective glare, assuming the narrative that the center belongs to her by default. News of a stranger, one with tired hands and rented shoes, moving into the orbit is a bruise against her certainty. Xia's first approach is not overt malice. It's the small barbs of someone who believes in setting boundaries through disdain. At the annual gala 2 nights after Xu arrives in the apartment, Xu walks into a room that has practiced its smiles like a ritual. The dinner is polished, the speech is measured, her dress is simple but elegant. She stands in a corner because she does not yet know how to navigate the constellation of social expectation that orbits such events. Xia, in a gown that leaves the back of her neck bare like a statement, drifts toward the CEO with the grace of someone who has rehearsed intimacy and entitlement together. She greets him with a lip curve that both acknowledges and claims. Xu meets Xia's smile with a quiet nod. It is in the exchange that the first real heat of public scrutiny touches Xu. A server, clumsy with a tray, tips a glass of red wine that cascades toward Xu's shoes. Time stretches. The splash blooms like a crimson accusation across pale fabric and polished floors. Heads turn. Fu moves before anyone asks. He steps forward with the surety of a protector and wraps a napkin around a hand that is not even bleeding but that needs shelter. He deflects the embarrassed apologies with an economy that tells the room he will not debate the indignity. Xia's smile is venom restrained. She approaches Xu under the pretense of concern and offers a hand with a sugar-laced comment. It must be difficult, new to this world. The barb is polished until it gleams. Xu wants to disappear, She has been taught social survival in classrooms of scarcity. Make yourself small enough to be invisible, and they will not reach for you. She has never learned how to withstand a public humiliation wrapped in satin. But beneath her thin scarf and humble dress is a stubbornness that has carried her through midnight shifts and hospital waiting rooms. She straightens. She says nothing dramatic. She thanks the staff for the towels, and when Fu asks if she's all right, she smiles in a way that says, "I am fine." The room hums with an odd appreciation for dignity under pressure. This public test has consequences. Rumors begin to coil. At the office, hushed voices that once discussed quarterly reports now turn to whether every move Fu makes is calculated or sincere. Does he have a motive? Why would a man of his stature choose a woman like her? In the elevator, faces that once nodded now avert their gaze or lean in with thinly veiled glee. The whispers are the first small fractures that signal larger storms. In the space where privilege meets necessity, reputation is both currency and weapon. Amid the company's hum, Fu is not complacent. He senses the fragility of her position, not only socially, but legally. The contract they signed offers structure, but not invulnerability. A woman claiming the CEO's bedroom for a night is a figment that the society loves to feast on. He insists that his assistant, Jiang Sheng, remain close, and that company security be heightened in a manner that protects but also does not strangulate Xu with publicity. He arranges care for Xu's mother. He tracks the hospital charts like a man who has never had to read them until now, and he starts small investigations, not the invasive kind, but procedural checks to ensure that any potential smear campaign can be addressed. Yao watches all of this with an odd mix of gratitude and a prickly sensation that should be named, perhaps, shame. She did not want to be a charity case. She wanted to be useful, to pay back the world with steady wages and the patience of someone who knows the economy of work. Yet this arrangement is doing more than covering bills. It is rearranging her sense of self. At night she hears the faint echo of childhood music, piano keys that were once a dream and now sit in the parlor like a promise. Not everyone acts from malice. Fu's friend and colleague Fu Jiajia arrives one afternoon like a bright current. She is a small, fierce presence who treats Xu with a blend of curiosity and practical compassion. She visits with take-out boxes that smell of homemade broth and with a laugh that breaks the ice in rooms thick with tension. She teaches Xu how to take the elevator to the gym, how to use the security app for deliveries, how to navigate a world where people assume you have a hand in every decision they can't understand. Jiang Sheng is a different sort of ally, quiet, methodical, a man whose tastes are in neat spreadsheets and precise schedules. He becomes the channel through which practical matters flow, hospital appointments, reception staff instructions, and discreet requests for the legal team. He is a presence that makes the machinery of protection whir, and Xu is grateful for roads she would otherwise not have known how to travel. Yet the old city is not entirely absent. There are moments when the past leaks through, small reminders that wealth does not erase history. Xu sits on the piano bench with a sheet of music she does not know how to read, and when her fingers strike a wrong key, the sound is honest and human. A sticker in the corner of the piano contains a child's scrawl, 0825, scrawled in a line like a secret. She traces it with a fingertip and a memory flashes. A classroom desk marked with the same numbers. A boy who once shared his lunch of strawberries. A laughter that sounded like the world could be rearranged by kindness. For a moment she allows herself to imagine another life. One where she is not defined by debt or a signature on a contract. She allows herself briefly to think that kindness can be repaid in ways that have nothing to do with money. The city is a place that keeps the balance of stories in motion. For Xu, the move into the CEO's orbit has brought time and the promise of care, but it has also exposed her to a new kind of scrutiny that is less predictable than the unpaid bills she learned to count. The contract, which solved the immediate problem of a hospital deposit, has become a hinge on which many doors now swing, doors she did not know were locked. Rumors begin to do their slow work. The security logs, the visitor lists, small details, are mined by desk chatter. A seemingly innocuous photograph on a staff Instagram account catches a moment. Xu laughing in a sunlit atrium, Fu by her side with his hand across the low part of her back. Comments bloom like storm clouds. Jia's smile grows sharper in response. The company's water cooler politics begin to pulse. Then one morning, as Shu walks through the basement level where the staff who clean her old cafes still work, an old friend recognizes her and gasps. "Is that really you, with Mr. Fu?" The man's voice is equal parts awe and suspicion. Shu feels the weight of 1,000 small judgments condense into a single stare. She is used to the economy of second glances, but now every glance is amplified by the cachet of the man who signed her name into legal paper. People she once worked beside in the night now talk around her like she is a headline. That night, she stands at the parlor window, looking out over the city where the lights flicker like a field of stars, and the phone in her hand carries the warmth of a message from her mother. "They took very good care of me. The nurse says I sleep like I used to." Gratitude swells inside her like a tentative new thing. Hope, perhaps, or relief. She presses her forehead against the cool glass and thinks of the warm blazer that once covered her shoulders in a suite that was not hers. The tin of strawberries on the counter becomes a small talisman, bright, fragile, and completely ordinary. But the world beyond the glass is not gentle. The contract that spans a few pages of paper will begin to pull at threads in ways she cannot yet imagine. There are forces in the company that do not like improvised narratives. There are ambitions that hunger for small missteps. There are old wounds in Fu's family that see the presence of an outsider as an affront to a social map they never consented to change. The first true crack comes not through a dramatic confrontation, but through a whisper. Someone on the board believes there is a risk in an unvetted story. A shareholder demands clarity. An assistant leaks an anonymous email that suggests compromised decision-making. It is easy to misunderstand truces when you cannot see the full field of battle. Xiaohuanyu's posture tightens. She begins to show up in the hallways with a smile that holds a question. How is someone who slept in the CEO's suite supposed to gain trust? Zhu hears rumors as if the air itself is changing. But rumors are not charges. They are the kindling for them. The room where she has been carefully building a fragile new life contains, in its dark corners, the potential for far greater flames. For now, however, the immediate is still secure. Her mother's surgery is scheduled, her hospital bills are paid, and she sleeps in rooms that have keys she did not have before. She has paid with a signature. For tonight, that must suffice. If this story is grabbing you, and you want to see how a promise made under fluorescent lights unravels in a world of whispers and ambition, subscribe and stay with this journey. The next morning, the company courtyard hums with its usual choreography of suits and coffee cups. Fu moves through it with the ease of a man who owns more than property. He owns habit and reputation, and the ability to command attention with a glance. Shu watches from the edge, pocketing her courage like a talisman. She has her schedule and a list of tasks written in a thin notebook. Hospital follow-ups, forms to sign, piano practice. She has learned to move between worlds the way dancers shift weight while keeping rhythm, lightly, precisely. Then the unintended happens. A package sits at the front desk, a glossy envelope with the company logo and the words "Notice" stamped in red. It is addressed to her. The courier looks at her with eyes that do not know whether to be sympathetic or scornful. She opens it with fingers that tremble, half expecting fines or rebukes. The letter inside is curt and formal, a notice that an audit has flagged anomalies in the Huai project, that certain sensitive documents have been leaked to competitors, and that, pending an internal review, certain members will be asked to stay for questioning. It is phrased like a bureaucratic breeze, but the undercurrent is a current of accusation that can pull anyone under. Her name is not listed, not yet, but the language in the halls begins to feel like a measuring stick. An innocent misstep here can be weaponized there. Fu's expression, when he sees the envelope, is unreadable at first, and then, impossibly, softer than she has ever seen him. He touches the place on her sleeve where the wine once soaked through and says, "Come with me." They move through corridors that smell of polished wood and fresh coffee. Doors open and close like the lungs of the company. At the elevator, Fu's hand brushes hers. Not a possessive hold, but a guide. She feels the electricity of that contact like a live wire in her chest. He does not speak the words that would make everything make sense. 10-year confession, childhood kindness, the weight of memory. For now, they walk side by side into the teeth of a storm that has yet to start. The piano's distant strings of imagined songs waiting patiently for their moment. The jade pendant hidden in a drawer of low things, a small stone she had once been told to keep for luck, sits like an unread note, its secret pressurized under her ribs. Outside, the city is indifferent. Inside, reputations shift like tectonic plates. The contract that bought them time has also set them on a collision course with questions that no contract can answer. Who will protect a reputation when the machinery of rumor decides to grind? And who will pay when the cost of protection is the surrender of privacy? As the elevator climbs, Shu steadies herself. She rehearses nothing. She only knows the sound of her own breath and the faint memory of strawberries on a bench under an afternoon sun. And, below it all, the sense that, in falling asleep in a suite she should never have been in, she has opened a door no one can close. The suite's heavy door in the night was simple chance. The consequences are anything but. The city outside continues its indifferent hum, unaware of the lives pivoting inside glass towers. In the lobby, a receptionist lifts her head with the practiced neutrality of someone who has watched too many stories pass like weather. "Mr. Fu," she says, and the world condenses into a neat formality. Fu nods. "We'll be in the boardroom." He turns, and for a second, the look he gives Shu is a private thing, a promise that is not written into any of the legalese she signed. It is a look that says he will stand with her, and also carries the quiet warning that standing together in a glass house invites stones. Doors close behind them with the soft click of inevitability. The hush of the boardroom welcomes them, and with it the first quiet edge of a storm that will test the thread of a contract born out of kindness and need. The boardroom breathes like a held thing. Men and women in tailored suits fold their hands around coffee cups as if bracing against an arriving storm. The projector hums with a corporate slide, pie charts, timelines, the sterile language of risk, and Fu Yanxi sits at the head of the table with the patience of someone used to steering pressure into decisions. Shu Qinghuan stands at the doorway, small as a folded note, watching the room where her life has landed like spilled ink. Anomalies in the Huai project are not abstract. They are knives hidden in spreadsheets. A competitor has obtained proprietary development files that could derail months of work and millions of investment. The board expects answers. The first question becomes, how did this happen? The second, more corrosive one follows, who is responsible? Fu listens to his chief of security describe late-night access logs and an IP spoofing pattern that suggests internal facilitation. He feels a coldness move from his collarbone to his fingertips. The conversation shifts, delicately at first, toward the unexpected staff presence in executive spaces and the risk that someone with physical access might be exploited. It is a narrow line between protecting reputation and shedding a scapegoat to save a margin. No one says Shu's name out loud, but it hovers like dust, implied, possible, accessible. He does not allow implication to become accusation in that room. He protects the thread of her privacy with the same decisiveness he uses for shareholder decisions. He reminds them that the company has processes to follow and that stray gossip must not supplant investigation. "We will follow procedure," he says. "We will not let rumor make law." Outside, the whisper mill spins faster. For Zhu, buttons on her sleeves no longer match the rhythm of the building. Colleagues look at her with an intensity that feels intrusive, sympathy that smells like judgment. Someone leaves a printed clipping on her desk, an editorial about internal leaks, with a sticky note that reads, "Stay useful." The message is not gentle. The first formal blow comes like protocol. Security requests Shu to present for a routine interview. The word routine is a courtesy. She sits in a small conference room under warm fluorescent lights that flatten faces and makes her own features look tired and raw. A young investigator leads the questioning with professional civility. He asks the sorts of questions people ask when they are building a case from behavior. Where were you nights? Who has your access card? Did you ever share credentials? He asks about recent interactions in the executive wing. She answers plainly. She slept on a couch once because she could not navigate the stairs in the rain. She signed a marriage contract that affords medical care for her mother. She has no motive to leak files. She will say, if pressed, that she would never betray someone's trust because the trust she most keeps is a small one, the belief that her mother would be well. But her answers, clean and earnest, do not always blunt suspicion. A person who dresses plainly and moves like survival is easy for others to frame as a mechanism. People prefer edges to complexity. At home, if the guest apartment can be called home, she tries to steady herself. Her mother is asleep after a pre-op check. Nurses move like weather around the rooms. Her mother's breath is steady and easier to read than it has been for months. Zhu traces the outline of an old bruise on her knuckle and thinks of the velvet couch and the way Fu had draped his jacket across her shoulders. The world rearranged itself in a night. Now it threatens to shuffle her again. Then the smear becomes kinetic. Sensitive files leak to a rival firm. The competitor publishes a thinly sourced article with internal code names and strategy, and within hours social media churns. Screenshots of an old social media post are shared. Images of her with a man who later turns out to be a hired actor she once paid to play a boyfriend. The actor had staged a short visit to calm her mother after an anxious night. The clip, recorded by a nosy ambulance attendant, is weaponized. Where she intended a lie of protection, others name it deception for gain. A cheap headline writes itself. Contract wife lying for sympathy? The hired actor detail deserves context she cannot always explain. The hospital nights had been raw. Her mother, lucid at moments, worried that Shu's sacrifices were unsustainable. "You need a life," her mother had said once, in a mix of praise and pity, as if pity could be the same as love. Zhu, in a temporary burst of resolve, went to a small agency and paid a man to sit beside the bed and speak kindly about futures. It was a small theatre of comfort, not a plot. But the court of public opinion does not care for nuance. Fu moves like a calm harbor. In public, he places himself between cameras and her. Behind closed doors, he speaks quietly but with command. "We will cooperate fully with the police and the board," he tells the legal counsel in Jiangsheng, who will run the investigative thread with a competence that is almost clinical. No hasty judgments, no leaks, all evidence cooperatively submitted. Jiangsheng becomes a quiet storm. He orders forensics, reaches out to cybersecurity contacts, and insists on non-disclosure across the investigative team. He writes long, precise emails by night, tracing IP footprints, cross-referencing server logs, and requesting backups from third-party vendors. He also begins to monitor internal chatter channels and employee payment ledgers. Suspicion is a sticky thing. Once gathered, data must be cleaned with method. For Shu, there is no luxury of moving slowly. Every footprint she leaves is catalogued. People who once shared a cigarette with her at the back door now dodge her in hallways. The hired actor's revelation becomes a wedge. A few calls from her mother, a message tremulous with confusion. "They say you lied," land like stones. She sits in the waiting room and feels her dignity erode under other people's assumptions. The first arrest headline lands a week later, though not hers. The police, working with digital forensics, act on an IP that leads to a cramped internet cafe in another district. A young man with nervous fingers is taken in for questioning. He is the hacker, a freelancer known to the underbelly of cyber opportunists. He is small in a police hall, his head bowed. Under interrogation, he is bargaining for leniency, producing names in exchange for lighter sentences. He gives up a payment trail. A series of small transfers funneled through a third party to an account linked to a company card registered to an assistant in Xiaowanu's department. The trail moves like a thin film in oil, visible if one watches closely. The revelation cracks open politics that smell of ambition. Jia is furious and clever. She wears outrage like jewelry, sharp and visible. In meetings, she professes disbelief and calls for transparency. Behind her eyes, ambition glints. She was always taught to protect an inheritance of power. Now she senses a threat that might be neutralized by a public pivot. If someone could be framed as the weak link, she might reassert her perimeter. The evidence is not yet full, but it is enough to make a dent. Fu's mother hears the rumors in the house like a physical thing. She calls a family council and asks for clarity. In her voice is a brittle concern. Why would our company be distracted by such scandals? Who is placing us at risk? To the family, Shu's presence is a cipher. She is a young woman who slipped into their orbit under conditions that, rain or no, were not part of the plan. The matriarch's disapproval is a cold edict that moves across the estate. Fu finds himself between loyalties, corporate duty, filial expectation, and a private memory that refuses to vanish. He visits his mother with the dossier of evidence, presenting what he and Jiangsheng have found. the hacker's confession, the trail of transactions, and a suspicious deletion of CCTV footage from the executive corridor the night before the leak. The matriarch listens like someone tallying valuables. She admires methodical order. But something in her gaze softens when he hands her a small photograph of Shu asleep on the suite couch, picked that night from a security still. She looked so tired, he says. And yet here we are, questioning her. In a quiet hour, Fu's mother asks to meet Shu in the hospital corridor, where her own consultations take place. Shu arrives, hands damp with hope and worry. She bows, more out of habit than deference. The matriarch studies her like an appraisal. "You keep to yourself," she says finally, yet the house trembles. They talk in careful sentences that sound like slow piano keys. Zhu speaks of numbers, medical deposits, unpaid wages, and of the small practical choices that become survival. She says nothing about the strawberries in the parlor or the 0825 scrawl on the piano. Those are tender things she keeps to shape her nights. The matriarch listens, and in that listening, finds a fissure in the simple assumptions she had made about status and worth. Meanwhile, the attack widens. A viral leak of internal chat logs suggests that someone with a legitimate badge accessed a secure folder at a time when no one except select personnel should have been there. The raw data shows a file transfer, but the metadata reveals an act of deliberate obfuscation. Someone cleaned the system logs. Zhang Sheng interviews IT staff. One of them, a junior technician with a quiet voice and hands that tremble when he speaks, reveals that he was offered cash to create a temporary backdoor and then threatened when he balked. He recites an account number and a date. It is a small human confession and it resonates with the hacker's story. When cross-referenced, both paths bend toward the same dead end, a shell company connected to Xia Wanyu's long-trusted manager. The manager is confronted and, under pressure, confesses to passing money, just enough to bribe a technician and a hacker. He claims he was acting under orders and names a chain of influence that leads up. The direction is ugly and complicated. Ambition, leverage, the desire to remove perceived obstacles. The company board is forced to act. Jia is suspended pending a full inquiry. For a moment, the world tilts and looks like fairness might have a chance. But indisputable proof is more stubborn. Xia's influence is deep. She anticipated such moves and covered her tracks with a careful hand. The CCTV footage, critical evidence, shows an edited window in the night, a missing span where the cleaning logs and door sensors should have been. Zhang Sheng finds a backup server from a neighboring firm that recorded the corridor. The footage is grainy but real. In it, a figure in a muted coat hands a small envelope to a man outside the executive door. The camera does not capture faces clearly, but the envelope's movement and the familiar sway of a certain gait are there. The assistant, flustered, recognizes her boss's walk and falters. Amidst the unfolding, Zhu receives a summons from the police. They are not charging her with the leak. They need statements. She goes, flanked by a legal counsel assigned by the company and with Fu waiting in the corridor like a quiet sentinel. The interrogation room smells antiseptic. Questions are asked with a clinical curiosity that does not hide the tacit suspicion of someone who has been named in the margins. She answers, again, with steady candor. When the officers ask about the hired actor, she says plainly that it was a kindness for her dying to wound mother, and she says the name of the agency and the payment she made. The admission becomes a piece of public color, later to be parsed and weaponized. The media, always hungry for spectacle, snaps its jaws. A tabloid prints an anonymous tip implying Shu used the contract for personal publicity. Memes appear. Trolls invent malicious backstories. Her past, short, practical, desperate, becomes a narrative of manipulation. People forget the context, that she had been counting hospital coins like prayers and carrying plates in night kitchens while her mother slept fitfully in a narrow ward. The strain settles into her bones. She begins to mistrust easy conversations. Friends become distant. Someone messages her mother a rumor about Shu's real motives and the old woman's sleep phrase. The sight of her daughter at her bedside, pale with worry, becomes a new kind of grief. Fu's mother, however, continues to observe with a complexity that is both subtle and decisive. She spends a long afternoon in the parlor, where the piano sits like an interrogator. She opens a small box on a side table that holds old keepsakes, rings, yellowed photographs, and her fingers, guided by muscle memory, find a jade pendant she had thought lost as a youth. The pendant is small, a teardrop of carved green, with a hairline scratch across its back. She stares at the pendant and then at the piano where a tiny child scratch, 0825, marks the wood like a secret. Something small and precise in her memory clicks. That evening, Fu's mother asks Shu to bring any keepsakes she owns that are not simply replacements. Shu, uncertain, retrieves a small packet from a drawer, her mother's birth bracelet, a rough coin, a jade stone wrapped in cloth because it was the only token of luck her grandmother could afford. Fu's mother turns the stone in her hands and freezes. The pendant has a matching hairline and a faint inscription on the clasp that matches a phrase the matriarch herself had used when she was small. It is an old lullaby line that both women know. The matriarch's eyes water, and for the first time in weeks, she speaks without the cool reserve of class habit. Where did this come from? Yu fumbles through memory and finds herself in a half-remembered scene, a younger boy with ink on his shirt, a brief scurry in an alley where the matriarch, then a woman of no consequence, had fainted in a market. A child had offered the pendant, a found thing, to comfort her until help arrived. She had given it back when she was able, but the memory blurred. That the matriarch now recognizes the stone, an object tied to an embarrassed recall, reorients the house's moral compass in a small but decisive way. The revelation is not proof of wrongdoing, but it is proof of a human tie, awkward and unexpected, that complicates prejudice. When Fu's mother speaks of this in front of the family council, the air changes. She remembers being helped and naming the child who had touched her hand. She insists on revisiting old diaries and finds a scribble, 0825, next to an entry about a cold day in a crowded market. The coincidence is a hinge. She saved me once, the matriarch says quietly, and it is a statement that rearranges the room. Public vindication is not instantaneous, but it is a necessary turn. With the matriarch's curiosity now engaged, Zhang Sheng's technical evidence receives the kind of attention that slides easily into the board's conscience. The hacker's confession, the assistant's admission, and the neighboring CCTV footage together create a mosaic that is hard to dismiss. Money moved from an account that traces to Zia's manager. Messages intercepted showing coordination. A bank transfer timestamp that matches the night of the leak. The evidence also shows manual log deletion from within a terminal logged under an internal administrator's key. No small task, and no easy singular finger to point at without collusion. The board convenes a special session. The atmosphere is taut, an animal stretched at full length. Jia sits with a composed face, accusation barely concealed. Fu rises carefully and presents the case as if playing a chord in a grand piano. Fact, timeline, evidence, legal counsel recommendations. He does not use rhetorical fireworks. His voice is plain, and the room listens because the cadence of authority compels them. He offers the board a choice: do justice or do expedience. He is unambiguous in his expectation. The company cannot trade integrity for convenience. The board's vote is decisive. Xia Wanyu is suspended pending criminal inquiry, removed from projects, and the manager who arranged the bribe is let go and handed to law enforcement. The hacker is charged with cyber intrusion and faces sentencing, but he cooperates, and his testimony, corroborated by logs, strengthens the prosecution's case. The company issues a public statement. An internal breach occurred. Investigations led to arrests. No executives were complicit. Remedial measures are in place. It is formal and only partially satisfying. For Shu, the press release is a balm and a raw nerve. Headlines celebrate the company's swift action and quietly note the misinformation that clouded the case. The hired actor story fades as context returns. He had been one actor in a short moral gesture. The public may not gaze forever, but the damage of being judged had cost her time and sleep. Still, personal restitution is slower. The staff who once whispered take a long time to come back. Some never do. The nights of cooking and delivery are gone, but the traces remain on her hands. Trust does not repair itself easily, especially when played out on a public stage. Her mother climbs the steps out of the hospital after the operation with a bruise-like pallor and the slow strength of someone who has walked through a furnace and come out with stitches. Fu's care, arranged, paid, and attended, makes the difference. The doctors call the operation successful but counsel rest. Recovery is a timeline of small victories, a stronger appetite, a smile that does not fade by noon, a hand squeezing with newfound confidence. Zhu breathes in those days like new air and begins to believe the contract might have been less a chain than a bridge. In this fragile restitching, Fu's own standing shifts in public view. He had defended her quietly in the halls and loudly in the boardroom. He had privately ferried the truth with facts that could stand in front of scrutiny. And now, at the company's annual gala, he elects to use the platform not for power but for vulnerability. The gala is a study in light and image. Cameras hang like fireflies, guests glide in gowns and polished shoes, and the air smells faintly of lemon oil and expensive perfume. The board expects to hear quarterly triumphs and promises. Fu takes the stage with a measured posture. He does not read a prepared statement about numbers. He looks at the audience and then at a camera, as if choosing to place truth into the public vein. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, voice steady and clear, "recent events have tested more than our security protocols. They've tested our integrity and our compassion." He pauses and looks at Shu, who stands at the edge of the dais with a steady hand placed on her grandmother's pendant. He wears the same pendant now, a small sign of the connection. He continues, "We made mistakes in our assumptions and will be accountable for them. But there are deeper mistakes in the world, ones that allow privilege to forget the humanity of others. Today, I want to correct an injustice." The room leans in, cameras pivot. He tells a story, a brief sketch of two children, a misplaced pendant, the quiet kindness that binds them. He speaks of the hacker and the payments, of a manager who took a path of greed, and of a young woman who collapsed from exhaustion in a suite because the city had no room for her grief. He speaks of her work ethic, and the fact that she signed papers to secure her mother's surgery. Then, with a deliberate economy, he unfolds the pronouncement that will ripple through gossip columns and family parlors alike. "Qinghuan," he says, "is my wife." People react with a noise that is equal parts shock and curiosity. The phrase is simple, yet incendiary in a room that subsists on optics. He continues, eyes wet with a truth he can no longer hide. "Not because I can buy her comfort, but because I cannot stand by and let other people decide her worth. Not because of appearances, but because I have loved her for 10 years. The confession lands like a clarifying bell. For a moment, the room's shallow appetite for spectacle is overtaken by the human scale of an old, slow love finally spoken aloud. The matriarch, seated in the first row, covers her mouth with a hand and weeps a small private tear. Xia, caught in her place, has nowhere to hide her shock. The public statement is more than a romantic flourish. It is an act of protection. He publicly names the evidence, announces suspensions and cooperation with legal processes, and places the company's full weight behind Shu's vindication. He reads out, calmly, pieces of the record, the hacker's confession, the manager's admission, the recovered CCTV footage. It is not melodrama, it is documentation placed in the light. What follows in the days after is a strange hybrid of relief and awkwardness. The board sends an official letter clearing Shu of any culpability in the leak. Press cycles run narratives of shame reversed. Xia's public reputation collapses under the weight of evidence. She is fired and faces professional disgrace. The manager and other accomplices face legal consequences. The hacker goes to trial and receives a sentence altered by his cooperation, but he will serve time, a sober reminder that illegal acts have costs. Fu's act of public defense changes the social tide, but it does not erase private wounds. Zhu's relationship with the hired actor remains an odd footnote, and she meets with people who struggle to move past the awkwardness. Her friends from the night shifts find her a different person, safer, but less familiar. The city still holds its hierarchy, but a small crack where compassion entered refuses to slide closed. In private moments, however, a truer intimacy grows. The parlor piano becomes a space for late-night honesty. Fu and Shu sit with unlit lamps and speak in sentences that are smaller than speeches. He tells her about the desk where he kept her sketch of piano keys for 10 years, about the strawberries they once shared that tasted like a future he never dared imagine. She tells him about the hours she worked, the smell of hospital antiseptics, and the way her mother kept a calendar of medication like a talisman of survival. He listens with a tenderness that has weight. She learns to accept care without feeling diminished. One night, when the house is quiet and the city seems to breathe through open windows, Xu finds a way to the piano and plays a hesitant melody. Fu sits beside her, his hand finding hers on the keys. They do not need to speak the full language of love. Their hands say what words would make clumsy. He confesses the simple fact of his feelings. The timing of his life finally allowed him to act, and he did not intend to wait any longer. She confesses her fear of being tokenized, of being lost in a wealth that did not smell like the walks and the hospital wards she knows. They reach toward one another and build something steadier than a contract. Fu's mother, reborn in curiosity about the past, visits Xu's mother in the hospital and sits for a long conversation. It is awkward at first, two women from different maps of life finding a common language. The matriarch apologizes in her way for snap judgments. She admits that the house had been too quick to dismiss. The reconciliation is not instantaneous. Trust is not an item you exchange at a counter. But the two women share laughter over small things, a memory of a market, a candle blown out by a sudden gust, and there is a slow unfreezing. The legal system does its patient work. Evidence is collected, attorneys argue with meticulous care, depositions take place. Xia faces not only professional ruin, but criminal inquiry for coercion and bribery. The public watches with a mixture of delight and schadenfreude. In court, the manager's testimony is pivotal. He names names, he weeps in a way that feels like relief. For Xu, the court is a place of anxiety. She sits with her lawyer and answers questions with the same honest clarity she has always used. The judge listens to the evidence and the witnesses. The ruling holds that the hacker and the accomplices are guilty. Xia's complicity is found in the chain of command, but full legal consequences take their time. Investigations must be meticulous to be just. Amid the rational wheels of law, tender scenes bloom. Xu's mother grows stronger, a slow arc of recovery that refuses to be rushed. She learns to walk a few more steps each day, her appetite returns, and she begins to laugh with a small fierceness that had been buried by hospital rooms. One afternoon, she reaches for a bowl of strawberries, and with a mischievous smile teases Xu. "You and your strawberries." Men are useless unless they remember the small things. The joke, a private, playful thing, makes Xu laugh until her chest hurts, and Fu, standing nearby, feels a warmth he had not expected. Family, in imperfect, messy form. There are moments of friction. The contract that served as an emergency lifeline grows awkward in the face of openly confessed love. The legal team suggests the most prudent path is to formalize matters properly. Transition from a marriage of convenience to one of genuine partnership with clear legal boundaries for assets and responsibilities should both parties agree. Xu hesitates. She feels raw with all that has occurred. The idea of vows makes her knees weak because the memory of signing the first paper is tangled with humiliations and pragmatic need. But as weeks move and as the smaller scenes of care stack, Fu sitting in the hospital corridor reading, Fu Jiajia bringing soup late at night, Zhang Sheng quietly resolving a bureaucratic snag, she begins to see a life that is more than rescue or spectacle. One quiet afternoon, Fu brings her a small envelope and a plate with 2 strawberries on a napkin. He sits opposite and looks at her with a gravity that is both familiar and new. "You don't owe me anything," he says. "You never did. And the papers we signed were to give your mother care. But if we are to continue, if we are to be something together beyond necessity, I want it to be because we choose it." She thinks of the nights she counted shifts, of the file transfers that almost ruined her, of the jade pendant and the way the matriarch's memory had opened. She considers the future with a cautious, practical heart. She thinks of dignity and how fragile it can be when placed on display. Then she nods, not theatrically but deliberately. "I want to choose it too," she replies, voice steady. "But I want to be clear that I will keep my work, my music, my life. I won't become invisible." She smiles, and there is humor in the line. He laughs, relieved. They renegotiate the legal terms, not as a vindictive partition but as a mutual safeguard. Separate finances remain, but they add clauses of shared decision-making for family matters and a plan to support philanthropic initiatives for hospital access. Few's attempt to turn a private rescue into a public good. The new agreement is a document of intention rather than a ledger of ownership. It is also for Shu a symbolic step, transforming necessity into partnership. Then, in a quieter fold of the narrative, there is the tender confession that rewrites 10 years. One evening, under the soft light of the parlor, Fu tells her the story of the strawberry, how he had kept a scrap of paper with the memory of them sharing a fruit, how he had watched from a bench as she folded a napkin for him, how he had kept that corner of his life like an ember. "I never told you," he says, the admission small and honest, "because I was afraid to make your life into mine at the cost of your dignity. I promised myself I would find a way to be of use, not pity. I should have been braver sooner." Xu listens. She thinks of the cobalt couch in the suite, of the velvet lapel he had offered like a shield. She thinks of the way power can be used to stand by someone rather than to push them under. She reaches for his hand and presses a strawberry to his palm, an old gesture turned new confession. "You were always brave enough," she says. "I just didn't know it." Their relationship settles slowly into a rhythm that blends rescue with respect. They host a small family gathering, less ceremony than a mosaic of apologies and toasts. The matriarch stands and, with an uncertain voice, welcomes Shu not as an intruder, but as a daughter-in-law in time. The acceptance is not whole. Old prejudices do not unravel instantly, but the matriarch puts a hand for a long beat on Shu's shoulder and says, "You were with me when I needed someone a child could be." That is more than some people can say. The words feel like a benediction. Xia's fall is public and painful. She gives a small press conference where ambition and anger crack into regret. She is removed from the company and faces legal and reputational consequences that reshape her career. There is no need to gloat. The company issues a statement of policy reforms, and senior leadership undertakes a transparency initiative, an attempt to ensure that power does not become a cover for petty revenge. In the background of this public restoration, Zhang Sheng receives a promotion for his meticulous work. Fu Jiajia grows closer to Shu as a friend. The small Wi-Fi technician receives a settlement for the coercion he endured, and chooses, after recovery, to return to school. These are minor arcs, but in aggregate they make for a world that has learned, in fragments, to be accountable. Months later, the mother who had feared losing her life recovers enough to host a small dinner in a modest neighborhood restaurant. The table is long and crowded with people who had helped in small ways. Nurses, old co-workers, the man from the delivery route who always saved a paper-wrapped sandwich for Shu. Fu sits beside Shu, holding her hand under the table. He is no longer the distant figure in glass towers, but a man who attends rice and broth with care. They speak quietly about futures and plans, the possibility of music lessons for Shu, a small fund for patients in the hospital, and the way they will steward public perception going forward. On the last night of the arc, they go back to the suite where it all began. The couch, the velvet, the scent of cedar and citrus. The suite is quieter now, a stage cleaned of its first flurried drama. Shu sits on the couch and looks at the velvet cushion where she first slept exhausted. Fu sits beside her, and for the first time the gesture is not transactional. He takes from his pocket a small, neat box. Inside is not an ostentatious ring, but a simple pendant with a matching jade stone, an echo of the one that had tied their histories together. He says softly, "I want to keep making choices with you, not for you." She takes the pendant and loops it over her fingers. The jade clinks softly, a sound that has become a motif of new beginnings. She thinks of all the nights, the courthouse, the hospital, the boardroom, the parlor piano, of small rescues and large confessions, of the many ways human kindness can be both awkward and luminous. She lifts her chin and laughs, a small, true sound. They do not dramatize with vows or showy promises. Instead, they promise to learn each other in real time, to fail and to repair, to be accountable and to protect. Fu's declaration of 10-year love remains, but it is now joined by daily practices. Shared piano practice, quiet hospital visits when others cannot come, and a commitment to transparency. They decide to host a small scholarship in Shu's mother's name for patients who cannot afford pre-op deposits, a way to turn a private salvation into a public one. The city outside remains indifferent and bustling, but the suite, the place where one exhausted woman fell asleep and changed a life, becomes a quieter symbol. It is not a palace transformed by fairy dust. It is a place where two people learn to be partners without erasing where each began. In the months that follow, Shu slowly reclaims pieces of herself. She signs up for piano lessons and plays scales until her fingers ache. She returns to night classes in the morning to complete a certification she had left mid-term. She picks up her old apron one afternoon and cooks for the staff in the company kitchen as a small way to remember where she came from. People come and go, and some return with apologies that seem enough. The material debts are settled, the emotional ones require daily work. At the very end, as winter light thins over the city, they host a small private ceremony in the garden behind the mansion, not a wedding in the tabloids, but a quiet promise between two people who have weathered a storm together. The matriarch watches, hands folded, a smile breaking like dawn. Zhangsheng and Fu Jiajia stand as witnesses. Shu's mother, steady and stronger than before, gives a small toast, her eyes bright. Fu takes Shu's hand, and with no contract needed to validate it says, "Will you continue to be my partner in the way we choose?" Shu smiles and squeezes his fingers. "Yes," she says, the single word full of the weight of everything that has passed and an honest hope for what comes next. They do not expect perfection. They expect to be present. The pendant swings at her throat like a secret and a bell. If this tale moved you, leave a comment on the moment that touched you most, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that follow ordinary people through extraordinary turns of fate.